Do you believe that the illnesses we face come only from the body? Or is there something beyond, something invisible, that precedes every physical symptom? This might seem like an uncomfortable question at first, but that's precisely where the secret lies. Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, believed that many ailments don't just happen by chance, but have a deeper root, spiritual, emotional, and even linked to past lives. Perhaps you've experienced this firsthand. Medicine offers treatments, tests, medications, but sometimes it feels like nothing is enough, as if the body is screaming, but the origin of the scream is somewhere else. Cayce invites us to look beyond flesh and bone into the soul. And it is precisely this journey that we will embark on together now. Before we go deeper, let me make a pact with you. This video is not about denying the importance of medicine, nor about creating false hopes. It's about seeing the other side, the one that science often avoids touching, the connection between inner life and bodily health. Edgar Cayce used to say that understanding this connection can be the key not only to alleviating symptoms, but to transforming the entire experience of illness into a path of self-knowledge. And here's the promise I make to you. By the end of this conversation, you will understand how Cayce explained the spiritual origin of diseases. You will hear examples from his readings, and, who knows, you might start looking at your own body with different eyes. But pay attention. There is a revelation that will only become fully clear in the final minutes, a revelation about the true role of the soul in illnesses. Therefore, I invite you to stay with me until the end, because every part of this journey fits together, like pieces of a puzzle. Now let's start from the beginning. Who was Edgar Cayce? Born in 1877 in a small town in Kentucky, USA, he was a simple religious man who had little education beyond the basics. However, he had a unique ability. When he entered a deep trance state, similar to sleep, he would answer complex questions about health, spirituality, and even past lives. Most impressively, many of his medical recommendations, given without any academic training, proved to be correct and effective. Reports say that Cayce could, with just a person's name and location, describe their physical and emotional state in detail, as if he saw beyond what human eyes could perceive. To many, this sounded like a miracle, to others like charlatanism. But the fact is that thousands of people sought his help, and a large part found answers that traditional medicine had not been able to offer. But what makes Cayce so fascinating is precisely his view on the true cause of diseases. He said that before any problem manifests in the physical body, it begins on more subtle levels, in the mind, in emotions, and finally, in the soul. It's as if illness is a message, an attempt by the inner being to alert us to something unresolved. Think about how many times we hear phrases like, "I swallowed too much and now I have a stomachache," or "this situation gives me a headache." The body seems to translate our emotions into symptoms. Cayce took this to a much deeper level. For him, many diseases were the result of thought patterns, harbored resentments, unworked guilt, and even mistakes made in past lives, which the soul carries until they are finally understood and corrected. Now, imagine the impact of this view on someone who is suffering. Instead of seeing illness as just an enemy, Cayce suggested seeing it as a message. This does not mean that suffering is easy or desirable, but that it can contain a hidden opportunity, a chance to reorganize one's life, reconcile with old emotions, and set new directions for one's existence. But perhaps you're wondering, how did he come to these conclusions? During his trance states, Cayce performed what he called readings. In these readings, he described the spiritual origin of each person's diseases and indicated forms of treatment. And the curious thing is that often the recommendations were surprisingly practical. He suggested dietary changes, use of oils, massages, baths with certain substances, breathing exercises, and even posture adjustments. In other words, he combined spiritual vision with physical care. This point is essential. Cayce never denied the value of traditional medicine. He believed that the physical and spiritual are linked and that the two should go hand in hand. For him, true healing only happened when the patient understood the spiritual message behind the illness and at the same time took proper care of the body. This leads us to an important reflection. Are we accustomed to seeing only half of the problem? How many times do we treat the symptom, but fail to investigate the emotional or spiritual cause? How many times do we swallow grievances, nurture resentments, cultivate worries that are never resolved, until the body at some point decides to manifest? Let me tell you an example reported in Cayce's readings. He spoke about a person who suffered from severe arthritis. According to his words, the origin was not just in the physical wear and tear of the joints, but in an emotional pattern of rigidity and resentment accumulated throughout life. The body stiffened because the soul was also stiff. The treatment included physical care, yes, but above all, the need to forgive and flex the mind. This type of explanation can be strange. After all, we are accustomed to thinking of diseases as the result of viruses, bacteria, genetics, or aging, and in fact, all of these exist. But Cayce invites us to broaden our perspective. For him, the body was merely the final stage where a much longer play had been rehearsed in the mind and spirit. And here an inevitable question arises. If diseases have a spiritual origin, can we truly prevent them by caring for the soul? This is one of Cayce's greatest lessons. He believed that yes, that cultivating positive thoughts, maintaining a living faith, practicing kindness and forgiveness, not only improved inner life but also strengthened the body against illnesses. Think about it. How many times have we heard stories of people who, despite serious diagnoses, defied medical expectations simply because they maintained a different mental attitude? This doesn't mean that faith replaces medicine, but that the mind and spirit are powerful forces in the healing process. And it is precisely here that the great revelation we will explore until the end of this video begins to emerge. The idea that every disease carries within itself a specific lesson for the soul. A lesson that cannot be ignored, because if it is, the body will continue to insist on reminding us. Now, before we move on to these deeper lessons and more intriguing cases, I need to ask you, have you ever noticed signs in your body that seem to reflect emotional or spiritual states? Have you ever felt that certain pains came at moments of sadness, anger, or accumulated stress? If so, then perhaps you have already experienced, even without knowing it, a little of what Cayce described in his readings. When Edgar Cayce described diseases as reflections of the state of the soul, he wasn't speaking only in abstract terms. He provided concrete examples. He said, for instance, that respiratory problems were often linked to suppressed emotions, to the difficulty of breathing life with lightness. People who carried deep sorrows, or who lived under the weight of anxiety, could see these feelings translate into physical symptoms in their lungs and heart. One of his most striking accounts involved a woman who suffered from constant asthma attacks. During one of his readings, Cayce revealed that the origin of the problem was not only in her physical body, but in a past life where she had literally suffocated in an accident. According to him, the memory of this experience remained imprinted on her soul, and now manifested as a physical tendency. To alleviate it, he recommended not only medical treatments and breathing exercises, but also practices of prayer, forgiveness, and emotional liberation. This example raises a profound question. To what extent are we carrying in our bodies pains that are not solely from this life? Could some of the ailments we face be echoes of experiences we don't consciously remember, but which still vibrate within us? Cayce spoke of this naturally, as if it were self-evident. For him, the soul carries records of all experiences, and the current body becomes the stage where these memories find an opportunity to be worked through and transformed. This completely changes the way we view illness, because instead of being just a burden, it comes to be seen as part of a pedagogical process of the soul. But how do we react to this idea? For some, it might seem frightening to imagine that today's pain comes from something we cannot remember. For others, it is liberating, because it means that nothing is by chance, and that every difficulty has a greater meaning. The question remains, are we willing to listen to what the illness wants to tell us? In his readings, Cayce also highlighted the relationship between harbored feelings and physical ailments. He said that repressed anger could turn into inflammation in the body. Prolonged sadness could weaken the immune system, and unresolved guilt could weigh on vital organs. According to him, it wasn't just a metaphor. These were realities observed in the functioning of the organism. Imagine someone who lives constantly resentful, On the outside, they might manage to hide it, but inside, this weight accumulates like an invisible toxin. Over time, the body begins to show signs, an ache here, a problem there. Cayce described this as the soul knocking at the door, asking for resolution. One case he attended involved a man with severe digestive problems. The medicine of the time could not explain the cause. In a trance, Cayce said the problem stemmed from the man's difficulty in emotionally digesting certain life experiences. He held on to old grievances, did not accept certain situations, and this was directly reflected in his stomach and intestines. The indicated treatment included changes in diet, yes, but primarily the practice of forgiveness and the exercise of accepting what could not be changed. This kind of approach made many people reflect on their own inner lives for the first time. Because let's face it, how many of us truly stop to think about the connection between emotions and the body? How many have noticed that, in moments of great stress, we become more vulnerable to colds, aches, and crises? The difference is that Cayce didn't see this merely as coincidence, but as part of a universal law of cause and effect. And perhaps you are asking yourself, but if all this is true, why do so many people continue to get sick? Even those who have faith, good intentions, and try to live in peace. This is one of the most difficult questions, and Cayce had an answer that was not always easy to accept. He said that not all illnesses come from failures in this life. Some are trials that the soul chooses to go through, necessary experiences for learning, however painful. This does not mean that we should passively accept suffering. On the contrary, for Cayce, every illness was an opportunity for transformation. It was as if life was telling us, here is a point that needs to be worked on, so that you can grow beyond it. Healing then did not depend only on medicines or treatments, but also on how the person responded to this inner calling. At this point, Cayce's message became deeply hopeful. Because even in the face of the most difficult diseases, he reminded us that the human spirit is greater than any illness. The body may be fragile, but the soul remains strong, seeking evolution. This vision offered solace to those who suffered, and at the same time an invitation to personal responsibility. After all, if diseases reflect internal states, then we have the power to influence, at least in part, our healing process. But here arises another intriguing dilemma: how to differentiate what is a consequence of current choices from what is a trial brought from previous experiences. Cayce never said it was simple. In his readings, he explained case by case, showing details of that person's life. But generally, he suggested that any illness, regardless of its origin, could be used as an instrument for growth. This was the key. It's not just about asking, why am I sick, but what can I learn from this? Now think about your own life. Has there ever been a time when an illness, even a small one, forced you to change habits, rethink priorities, or resolve internal conflicts? How many times is it not precisely the fragility of the body that reminds us of the importance of inner peace, family, faith? Perhaps this is the point Cayce wanted to highlight. The body alerts us when we stray from the path we should be following. Throughout his career, Cayce performed over 14,000 readings, many of them focused on health, and it's impressive how his guidance, given over a century ago, remains current. He spoke of the importance of a balanced diet, gentle exercise, contact with nature, conscious breathing, and adequate rest. All this at a time when medicine did not yet place so much value on these factors. But above all, he insisted that true healing was only complete when the spirit was also treated. And here I want to make an important digression. Perhaps you are wondering, isn't all this just belief, mystical interpretation? It's a legitimate doubt. Cayce himself said that each person should test it for themselves, experiment, and observe the results. He never asked to be followed blindly. On the contrary, he encouraged combining the best of conventional medicine with a spiritual perspective. This balance was, for him, the true path. This stance is what makes him so relevant even today. Because instead of creating opposition between science and spirituality, he sought unity. He recognized that exams, diagnoses, and medicines are fundamental, but he reminded us that they are only part of the story. The other part, equally important, lies in what we carry within: our feelings, our memories, our connection with the sacred. And here we arrive at a crucial point in our conversation. If Cayce was right, then every symptom is, in fact, a coded message. Something that needs to be deciphered so that we can not only alleviate the pain, but also understand what life is trying to teach us. Among the thousands of readings Edgar Cayce performed, some stand out precisely because they seem to touch on something universal, something that goes beyond the individual being attended. One of these was that of a young man who suffered from severe migraines since childhood. The medicine of the time had already tried various treatments without success. When Cayce went into a trance and described the case, he said that the origin of the pain was in a past life, where that young man had suffered a severe head injury during a battle. The trauma, according to Cayce, remained registered in the soul and now recurred as physical pain. The recommended treatment included specific massages, dietary changes, and, above all, practices of meditation and prayer to free the spirit from that memory. For many, this explanation might sound incredible, but the curious thing is that, by following the guidelines, the young man reported a significant improvement in his pain. This doesn't mean that all of it miraculously disappeared, but that the frequency and intensity decreased in a way that life became much more bearable. More than the physical improvement, there was also an inner transformation. He began to see his pain not as punishment, but as a call to care for his own spirituality. Another case involved a woman with severe heart problems. Doctors had already warned that her heart was weakened and that she was at serious risk. Cayce, in a trance, explained that her condition was linked to a pattern of excessive worry cultivated over years. She lived constantly anxious, anticipating problems, carrying responsibilities that often weren't hers. This emotional burden, he said, had directly reflected in her physical heart. The recommendation was clear. In addition to medical care, she needed to learn to trust more, to surrender worries into God's hands, and to cultivate moments of inner rest. The result was surprising. Combining conventional treatments with changes in her emotional and spiritual life, the woman managed to stabilize her health. More importantly, she discovered a new way of living, less anxious, more light-hearted. Her heart not only endured, but found strength in a more harmonious lifestyle. These accounts raise a central question. Are our bodies mirrors of our mental and spiritual attitudes? Cayce believed so. He said that each organ was related to specific aspects of inner life. The liver, for example, was linked to accumulated anger. The heart reflected our deepest emotions, especially love and worry. The stomach revealed our ability to accept or reject experiences, and so on. Upon hearing this, perhaps you recall moments when your body spoke too loudly. Who hasn't felt their heart race in the midst of intense fear? Who hasn't had a knot in their stomach in an anxious situation? These simple, everyday examples already confirm that there is indeed a bridge between emotion and body. Cayce merely expanded this bridge, taking it to even deeper spiritual dimensions. But there were also cases where illnesses were seen as life tests. A touching example is that of a child born with severe physical limitations. The desperate parents asked Cayce for a reading. In a trance, he explained that the soul of that child had chosen this condition before birth, as a form of learning for the child and also for the parents. It was not a punishment, but an opportunity for spiritual growth for everyone involved. This view, though difficult to accept, brought new meaning to the family. Instead of merely enduring the pain of the situation, they began to see a purpose there. The child, even with limitations, became a source of unity and love for the parents and siblings. The illness was not cured, but transformed into a channel of evolution for the soul of that family. Stories like these lead us to an uncomfortable but necessary reflection. What if some of the suffering we face is part of a larger plan, impossible to understand with human logic alone? Cayce constantly reminded us that the soul sees further than the mind. What seems unfair to us for the spirit can be a necessary path, and this leads us to another important lesson. For Cayce, no illness was useless. Each one carried a purpose, even if hidden. He said that even those conditions considered incurable had spiritual value. If they could not be cured in the body, they could be used to develop patience, compassion, and faith. In other words, even when there was no physical relief, there was room for soul growth. Now pause for a moment and think. How many times in your life have you gone through something that seemed unbearable, but later brought valuable lessons? Often, pain connects us with truths that we would otherwise never perceive. Perhaps that is exactly what Cayce wanted to teach us, that every difficulty is a disguised opportunity. But be warned, Cayce also cautioned against a risk. The risk of using this spiritual vision as an excuse to neglect the body. He never said that merely praying or changing thoughts was enough to heal. On the contrary, he emphasized that physical care was essential: proper nutrition, restorative sleep, exercise, hygiene. The difference is that for him, all of this needed to be accompanied by an inner change. Because without a transformation of the soul, the body would eventually manifest imbalances again. In his readings, he suggested simple practices, which today seem almost obvious, but which were little valued in his time. One of them was contact with nature. He said that walking outdoors, breathing deeply pure air, and feeling the sun's energy were ways to restore not only the body, but also the soul. Another constant recommendation was the cultivation of daily prayer, not as mechanical repetition, but as intimate dialogue with God. These guidelines reveal something essential. For Cayce, healing was not just a destination, but a continuous process of alignment between body, mind, and spirit. Those who sought only the quick disappearance of the symptom, without understanding the inner cause, rarely achieved true health. And here we come to a suspenseful point that I will save for the end. Cayce believed that there was a deep secret about the soul and diseases, something that could completely transform how we understand human health. He mentioned this secret in several readings, but only fully revealed it in specific situations. This is the enigma we will decipher in the last section of this narrative. For now, I want you to ask yourself, what has been the message behind the pains and difficulties you have faced? Was there a hidden calling there? Was life trying to lead you to a transformation that you, at that moment, did not perceive? These questions do not have an immediate answer, but they can open paths to a new way of living. Throughout all his readings, Edgar Cayce left a central message that seemed to weave together every example, every diagnosis, and every explanation. The physical body is a reflection of the soul. He said that we are, first and foremost, spiritual beings having a temporary experience in matter. And in this process, the body becomes like a mirror that shows, in the form of health or illness, what the soul still needs to resolve. But there was something even deeper, which he considered the true secret of healing. Cayce affirmed that every illness had a spiritual origin, but also a spiritual solution. It was not enough to care for the physical, nor just to understand the emotional cause. It was necessary to go a step further, to align oneself with the purpose of one's own soul. This was the decisive point. According to him, when a person recognized that their life had a greater meaning, that they were here to learn, love, and serve, something transformed within. Even if the illness didn't disappear completely, the relationship with it changed radically. Pain ceased to be an enemy and became a teacher. Fragility ceased to be defeat and became a path of evolution. For Cayce, true healing happened when the soul reconciled with its mission. He said that many people become ill because they live in discord with what they came to accomplish. People who harbor resentments, who cling to guilt, who resist forgiveness, end up creating spiritual blockages that sooner or later manifest in the body. When these blockages are released through faith, love, and service to others, health in many cases finds space to flourish again. Perhaps Cayce's most powerful teaching lies precisely in this simple yet demanding idea. To love is to heal. To love oneself, to love others, to love life. This love is not merely a feeling, but concrete action made of kindness, patience, forgiveness, and compassion. He said that love is the force that reorganizes all the unadjusted energies of the soul, and therefore it is the greatest remedy. But here an inevitable question arises. What about when physical healing doesn't come? What to do in the face of incurable diseases, in the face of permanent limitations? Cayce was clear. Healing does not always mean the elimination of the symptom. Often, true healing is internal. It is the peace found even amidst pain. It is serenity in the face of finitude. It is the certainty that the soul lives on beyond the body. For him, a person could die physically cured, because they had achieved reconciliation with their soul. This vision can seem harsh, but at the same time it is liberating, because it reminds us that we are not prisoners of the body. Even if it fails, even if it ages and gets sick, the soul remains intact, growing and learning. This gives life a much greater meaning than simply trying to avoid pain at all costs. It is here that Cayce definitively connects health with spirituality. He said that every sincere prayer, every act of forgiveness, every gesture of compassion is like an invisible medicine that strengthens not only the soul, but also the body. Often we do not perceive the immediate effects, but little by little they are reflected in physical balance, renewed energy, and resilience in the face of difficulties. Perhaps that is why so many people seeking his help found more than relief from symptoms. They found a new meaning for living. And this is perhaps Edgar Cayce's true legacy, to remind us that health is a state of harmony between body, mind, and spirit. When one of these three becomes imbalanced, the others inevitably suffer. But when all three work together, even amidst limitations, we experience a peace that goes beyond the mere absence of disease. Now, think about your own life. How many times have you sought only to resolve symptoms, without looking at the deeper root? How many times have you only wished for the pain to go away, without asking yourself what it wanted to teach you? Perhaps this is the moment to change the question. Instead of "why am I suffering?" ask, "what can I learn from this?" This shift in perspective may not eliminate suffering immediately, but it can transform the way you walk through it. And here is the final revelation Cayce left us. The soul does not get sick. It may carry marks, memories, unlearned lessons, but it always remains intact in its divine essence. The body may wear out, the mind may get confused, but the soul remains pure, connected to the greater source of life. Illness is merely the process of adjustment, a sign that something needs to be reorganized so that we can live more aligned with that essence. Understanding this is like lifting a veil, because it reminds us that behind all pain there is a greater truth. We are spiritual beings on a journey, and nothing, absolutely nothing, can destroy the divine spark we carry within. Therefore, the next time you face a difficulty, remember Cayce's words. See illness not just as an enemy, but as a messenger. Ask yourself what lesson your soul is trying to show you. And at the same time, take care of your body. Eat well, rest, seek medical resources. But never forget to also cultivate faith, love, and inner peace, because it is in this combination that true health is born. If this message resonated with you, if it brought a new way of looking at what you have lived or are still facing, I invite you to stay on this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with someone who might need this word today. Perhaps it is precisely the revelation that person is waiting to hear. And always remember, the body ages, but the soul remains young. The body gets sick, but the soul never loses its strength. The body one day says goodbye, but the soul continues its path of light. This is the great truth Cayce left us, and which can transform not only how we face illnesses, but also how we choose to live.